In 1990, the final movie in the Back to the Future trilogy came out. And if you were to sum up the spirit of our age, you'd be hard pressed to find a better summary than the final line in the movie. Doc Brown looks at Marty McFly and says, "Your future is whatever you make it, so make it a good one." It's so easy for us to buy into that kind of thinking. My guess is many of us probably have at some point in our lives. It's an appealing kind of thinking because it makes us feel like we're the captain of our own destiny. On the surface, your future is whatever you make it, so make it a good one. Sounds like the ultimate inspiration, doesn't it? It's a call to the self made man, the pull yourself up by your own bootstraps mentality. It's the anthem of the doer. But if you lean into that sentence, you'll hear the faint, cold echo of a very heavy and profound burden that you can't possibly carry and no one can. Because if your future is whatever you make it, then the entire weight of your existence, your security, your family's safety, your golden years in retirement rests squarely on your two shoulders. And nobody's shoulders are really broad enough to carry that load. Your future is whatever you make it, so make it a good one. It's really a siren song that is an orphan's creed. Rooted deep, underlying that theory lies a suspicion that if I don't take care of myself, no one else will. This mindset creates a specific kind of person that this morning I want to refer to as the anxious intern to kind of fix it in our minds what this looks like. Just imagine a young professional at a global firm. He's the first one in, he's the last one out. He's frantic, checking his emails at 2 a.m., striving to make sure he secures that one open junior partner slot. Every mistake that he makes weighs heavy. It feels like a death sentence. Every market dip feels like personal failure because he believes his future is whatever he makes it. And he knows that he's just one bad day away from going into exile. But now imagine another person in the same office, a person who works just as hard, is just as diligent, but he has a lightness in his step. He even whistles while he works because he's not carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. When the market crashes, he doesn't go into panic mode. When he makes a mistake, he just simply owns up to it and doesn't spiral into depression and despair. What's the difference? The second man's not an intern. He's the heir to the company. The CEO of the firm is his father. And his father's already taken him aside, put his arm around him, and said, "Son, you're the apple of my eye. I built this business for you to have. I love you. It's all for you. It's a done deal. It's my pleasure to give it to you." Now, the young heir is still going to work, perhaps maybe harder than anyone, but he isn't working to get a seat at the table. He's working out of the security of already having one. Today, as we look at Luke 12, in this text, we're going to see Jesus looking at his little flock of disciples, a little flock of doers, just like we kind of are. And he's trying to move them and us from the crushing anxiety of the intern to the joyful rest of an heir. Jesus' message in this passage isn't "don't worry, be happy," but rather, "don't worry because you've already got this." Today, Jesus' words give us the opportunity to move from the weighty, anxious fears that come as a result of us thinking our future's whatever we make it, and we have to make it a good one, to the rest that comes from living in the certainty of the future our Father has already made for us and our elder brother Jesus has already secured for us. Our text is really a continuation of the text we looked at last week. And so I want to keep it all together and keep it all together in a flow, because these things, they do hang together. Last week was greed. This week is anxiety. And they're really just two different sides of the same coin. So let me go back and begin reading this morning at Luke 12:12. And then we'll continue on down through the passage to verse 34. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But Jesus said to him, "Man, who made me judge and arbiter over you?" And he said to him, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I'll do this. I'll tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you prepared, whose will they be?' So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, they neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to the span of his life? If you then are unable to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock. It is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with treasure in heaven that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." This whole passage is about earthly wealth and what we do with it. Do we use it for an earthly purpose or God's purpose? Do we worry ourselves to a frazzle trying to get and keep it? Or do we rejoice in what we've been given? Do we work ourselves to the bone trying to get more to secure our futures and hoard what we have? Or do we invest in the only two things that will last into eternity: people and the kingdom of heaven? Last week, we looked at length at the parable of the rich fool, where Jesus tells the parable of a man whose land produced so much that he had a good problem. He didn't have anywhere to store everything. His solution was a page right out of Doc Brown's playbook. My future is whatever I make it. So I'll make it a good one. I'll pull down my barns and build bigger barns, and I'll say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Live your best life yet. Relax and eat and drink merry. But God calls him a fool because that very night his life was demanded of him. And then who got everything he had stored away? Now, in verse 22, what Jesus is doing is shifting the conversation from the rich fool to the danger that his disciples might face of falling into thinking like the world thinks. Look at verses 22 and 23 again. He said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor your body, about what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing." Jesus, notice the word therefore there in verse 22. The word therefore points to a shift. Jesus is shifting from two specific things that were highlighted in the parable of the rich fool. First, notice the shift from autonomy to dependency. The rich fool thought he was the master of his destiny. He was the one who was making his future a good one. And then suddenly there was no future. Remember how he used the words I and my 11 times in 3 verses. My crops, my barns, my goods. But then the rich fool finds out none of this was really his after all. He doesn't own the future. In verse 22, Jesus begins to show us that me-centered intern mindset, the idea that we are self-made and self-secured. Well, he's showing us it's a deadly illusion. But the word therefore in verse 22 also signals a second shift, a shift from the horizontal to the vertical. The fool thought his life was the sum of his possessions. Jesus shifts the focus by saying, life is more than food. The body's more than clothing. He's moving from that horizontal view, having our thoughts and eyes fixed on what we can put our hands on and accumulate, to a vertical view, having our thoughts and eyes fixed on the one who's been sustaining us the whole time. When Jesus says, therefore, in verse 22, this is what he's saying. He's saying, since you can't secure your life by building bigger barns like that fool, stop trying to play God and start living like a child of the King who is an heir to the throne. Starting in verse 22, Jesus is pointing us away from a self-made future toward a kingdom that's already there, already being managed by his Father. He says, therefore, I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor your body, what you will put on. Now, I want to be clear here. Jesus is not telling us that we don't need to work or that we don't need to care about the necessities of life. Jesus is the one who taught us to pray, give us this day our daily bread. But remember, it's a prayer of dependence. Our Father who art in heaven, give us today our daily bread. He's warning us that the snare of material goods can be an easy trap for us to fall into. From Jesus' perspective, earthly treasure is a trap because it causes us to invest our lives in this material world and rest on the false identity and false security the material world promises, but can't ever deliver. Because it's like putting treasure into a bag with holes in it. I spent most of my life doing this. As fast as I could grab onto stuff, it seemed to always be slipping through my fingers. Maybe some of you are experiencing that today. And since material things are so easily lost, we become anxious. Oh, I had so many sleepless nights. The Greek word for anxious that Jesus uses in this teaching is literally to be drawn in different directions. It's to be divided. Anxiety is a heart that's divided between trusting God and trying to secure ourselves and our future. Our anxiety about the cares of life, that's what prevents us from being focused on God and what God actually made us to do. Jesus spoke very true words in Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And yet, how many of us are trying to do that? One foot in both worlds. If our lives are all wrapped up in the horizontal, in the here and now of trying to make sure that our life's a good one, we simply won't have the bandwidth to focus on the vertical and the eternal. It will always get pushed out to the side. If we're constantly busy investing in ourselves to make our life a good one, we'll have nothing left to invest in others, to invest in the kingdom of Christ that we're heirs to already. No wonder Satan loves for us to be worried and divided, concerned about what we think we don't have and how we're going to get it and hang on to it if we do get it. Help us see this. Look what Jesus says in verse 24. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. In Jesus' day, ravens were considered to be unclean birds. They were scavengers. They didn't have much value in their religious system. You couldn't eat them. You couldn't sacrifice them. They had no monetary value whatsoever. But they did have a job to do that God created them to do. As scavengers, God made them to be the ones to clean up the ecosystem, to get rid of all the dead and decaying flesh. Now imagine if a raven suddenly got a Doc Brown complex. Imagine if a raven thought, my future is whatever I make it, and I'm going to make it a good one. And the raven spent all day trying to plow a furrow with its beak, or trying to run a combine harvester to fill a barn. It would be exhausted. It would be failing constantly. And most importantly, it would be too busy to do what God made it to do. Clean the earth. Ravens don't sit in trees watching the plants mature. They simply may do what God made them to do, and they trust that God will provide what they need. Don't you see how this is true for us? If we're totally focused in our lives on storing away in barns, trying to make our future a good one, we won't be focused on what God made us to be, people who glorify Him and enjoy Him forever. Jesus' message to us, again, it's not don't work. It's think about what you're really working for. Don't behave like an intern trying to earn your place and make a name for yourself. I've already done all that for you. That's what Jesus wants us to know. Jesus wants us to behave like an heir whose future has already been secured. A Christian doesn't work to find security and identity in their possessions. We already have that in Jesus. We work, as Paul says in Ephesians chapter 4, so we might have something to share with others. That's pretty radical. How many of us go to work with that mindset that we're working so that we have something to be generous with, something to share with others? What better way for us to go about life glorifying God? What better way to make people stop and ask, what do you have that I don't have? What on earth would make a people work simply so they could be generous toward others? Have something to share? Only a God who's been so generous to them that He would freely, by grace alone, give them the kingdom of His Son. In this text, Jesus is clearly teaching us that we do not work to be captains of our own destiny. We work to make the glories of our King and His kingdom known, because we're heirs of that kingdom. As Jesus continues to teach, He pivots from the birds in the sky really to a mirror. In verses 25 and 26, do you see it? He asks a question that really dismantles that Doc Brown mindset with simple, brutal logic. And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you're not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you so anxious about the rest? Think about that. Jesus calls adding 1 hour to your life a small thing. And for God, it really is. But to us, think about it, it's the ultimate thing. Think how we slave away. We spend billions on healthcare and gym memberships and organic diets, trying to get just a little more time. But Jesus says that even with all that striving, we can't even move the needle by 1 hour. We're powerless. Our times are literally in God's hands, not ours. And if we can't add an hour to our life, what makes us think our future's whatever we make it? The problem isn't the working. The problem's not the planning. The problem's not the investing. The problem is when we adopt that orphan spirit, that orphan mindset that says, if I don't take care of my future and secure it, no one's going to. Jesus calls this a pagan way of thinking. He says the nations of the world run themselves ragged trying to do this. When we live out that orphan mindset, do you know how we're living? We're living as if we don't really have a father in heaven at all. When we think our future's whatever we make it and it's up to us to secure it and make it a good one, we're living like an orphan. To put it in terms of our illustration today, we're living like interns who think their seat at the table depends entirely on their performance. It's a recipe for a life of little faith and a whole lot of anxiety. And a lot of Christians are living that way. Why do we fall into that trap of living that way? Well, think about what Paul says in 1 Timothy 6:10. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. Maybe filled themselves with lots of worries and anxiety would be another way to say it. Do you see what Paul's saying? Money and possessions, they're not evil. But the love of money and possessions is, because it's idolatry. Loving the created rather than the creator. We say it all the time. What is an idol? It's a good thing that we turn into an ultimate thing. A love of money leads to two things that Jesus is talking about in this text. It will either lead us to greed, to shutting the barn doors tight, or it will lead us to anxiety, or maybe both together. Greed and anxiety are the things that pierce us with many pangs. They don't bring peace, they bring distress. Look what Paul says happens when wealth becomes that ultimate craving in your life. It causes people to wander from the faith. Why? Because they're wandering into idolatry. Don't you see that? Those pangs of greed and anxiety are serious warning signs to us of a much greater danger, an idolatry that will ultimately lead us away from the faith, lead us away from our eternal inheritance. Greed and anxiety, they're like a shark fin in the water that warns of a much greater danger that lies beneath. An idolatry of control and security that's rooted in our pride, our desire to try to live our own lives rather than living the life God has made for us. Because our pride wants us to think our future is totally in our own control, we start to live for things that we think will give us that control. Greed and anxiety over life is sin that points to a deeper sin, a deeper idolatry, wanting to be our own gods in control of our own destiny. Your future's whatever you make it, so make it a good one. How dangerous is that? To show us how foolish our anxiety is, Jesus next takes us into fields of wildflowers. You've seen fields like that. They're absolutely stunning. They're gorgeous. You could sit there and look at them for hours and admire their beauty. And Jesus tells us in Luke 12:27, consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? It takes a lot of work to make a beautiful piece of fabric. My wife has made some really pretty things, spinning and weaving yarn, but she's not quite ready yet to make garments that are fit for a king like Solomon. But even Solomon's garments didn't begin to compare with the beauty of the wildflowers that carpet the landscape. God's the one who spins all that beauty up And he does it for flowers that are here today and tomorrow are going to be thrown into the oven and burned. Think of the logic of Jesus' argument throughout this whole passage. If God cares for and feeds the lowly, unclean ravens, and if God makes flowers that are here today and gone tomorrow even more beautiful than a king's garment, how much more will God take care of you, his child, the pinnacle of creation? Take a minute and just think about all of this from God's perspective. Think how insulting it must be to God that his children would worry like orphans, trying to secure their own future rather than trusting in his providential care. That's why Jesus says in verses 29 and 30, and do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried, for all the nations of the world run after these things. And your Father knows you need them. When we worry, do you see what Jesus is saying? We're no different from the pagans. But have you ever tried to stop worrying? It's like trying not to think of pink elephants. The more we think about not worrying, the more worried we become. That's why Jesus doesn't simply say, don't worry, be happy. If Jesus stopped there at verse 30, that'd kind of be where he'd leave us. It'd be another place of crushing weight. We realize we're powerless to add an hour to our lives. We realize our bigger barns are made of sand and will disappear one day. We realize our striving is just a pagan attempt to be our own gods and secure our own future. And then we realize we can't even stop worrying. But then Jesus breaks the tension. And in breaking the tension, he gives us the solution to worry. Look at verses 31 and 32. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Now, first, notice what Jesus doesn't do here to help us deal with worry. He doesn't give us a better time management system. He doesn't give us a 5-step plan to get our life in order or to have financial peace. He breaks the tension by changing the subject from our performance to the Father's good pleasure. He leans into this little flock, this group of disciples who feel very small and vulnerable. Maybe they're even behind on their bills because they've been following Jesus around. And he uses a word that changes everything. The word give. In the world of an intern, everything has to be earned. In the world of the orphan, everything is taken. But in the kingdom of God, everything is given. Jesus is telling us you can stop the frantic late night emails to the universe. You can stop the obsessive checking of the spiritual bank account. You don't have to claw for a seat at the table because the Father's already pulled out a chair and your name's on it. The tension breaks because the burden of trying to make and secure our own future is taken right off of our shoulders and placed on the shoulders of the King who calls us his own. Jesus moves from the logic of the field straight to the love of the Father. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. You see what this is? It's a done deal. God's made up his mind. This is the way it's going to be. The gospel proclaims to us what? It proclaims that through faith in Christ, we are no longer interns. We're no longer orphans. But instead, we are children of God and co-heirs with Christ. And united to faith by Christ and in Christ, we are now the apple of our Father's eye. He couldn't be more pleased with us because when he looks at us, he sees his son. How can unclean ravens and anxious interns like us be the apple of our Father's eye? How can we be given a kingdom? You remember earlier, Jesus told us to consider the lilies. Consider how God clothes them in glory. Well, think how he's clothed you in glory. And think of the true lily, Jesus Christ. On the hill of Calvary, the only man who ever perfectly sought the kingdom, and that's what Jesus did his whole life, perfectly sought the kingdom, was stripped of his garments. He was made naked and bare and thrown into the fire of God's judgment. And why did he do that? So you could be clothed in his righteousness. This is the great exchange. At the cross, Jesus took your orphan spirit upon himself. He cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And he took the loneliness and he took all the abandonment that our self-seeking striving deserved. He was treated like an exile, so you and I could be brought in as heirs. He lost everything, so you could gain everything. Why are you worried? The Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom was made possible through the Son's sacrifice on Good Friday. You don't have to earn your way in anymore. Jesus already reminded us in Luke 10:20 to rejoice because our names are already written in heaven. Our future is secure. The CEO of the universe has put your name on the inheritance papers. So how do we respond to being gifted this kingdom? Your hearts move from clutching to contributing. Because we no longer have to work to secure our own kingdom, we're free now to do what God made us to do. We get to give. We get to be generous. In verse 33, Jesus says, "Sell your possessions." That's not a legalistic command to suddenly become poor. It's an invitation to be free, to not be bound to the things that want to bind you and bring deep pangs into your life and pain. If you know and really truly believe that you have an inheritance that's imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you, you don't have to white knuckle your bank account anymore. You can open your hand and use your resources to bless others because your money bag's in heaven. They're already full. Verse 33, with a treasure in heaven that does not fail, where no thief approaches, no moth destroys. Just compare that promise Jesus makes there in verse 33 to another promise God gave to Israel through the prophet Haggai. This was in the midst of Israel's disobedience. And it describes really many years of my life, not just what happened during Israel's disobedience. Haggai 1:6, you've sown much and harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm. And he who earns wages does so to put them in a bag with holes. What Jesus is saying here in Luke comes right out of that prophecy. It's the exact opposite of God's prophecy to Haggai. Look at the contrast. God's way, treasure in heaven that does not fail, that is kept safe and secure. And the world's way, work that comes to nothing because treasure goes into a bag with empty holes, and as soon as it goes in, it's fallen out. Which way are you going? Are you living like an orphan or an heir? Imagine that heir. Imagine that intern walking into the office again on Monday morning. The intern is filled with anxiety that drives his striving. He's asking, am I going to be good enough today to earn my place? But the heir just goes to work with a quiet confidence. He works just as hard, like I said, maybe even harder, but his motive for work is totally different. He isn't worried about keeping his position because the Father has already promised the company to him. His work isn't about earning a place. It's about honoring the Father who has given it all away to him. Friends, your future is not whatever you make it. Your future is the kingdom the Father is pleased to give you through the blood of his Son. You are not an orphan. You're not even an intern. You are an heir whose name is already written in heaven. Go into the world and live out what God already says you are. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this timely reminder, because many of us, in fact, do live very anxious lives, anxious about health, anxious about money, anxious about children. Father, would you remind us this day and every day that we are children of God, co-heirs with Christ. The kingdom is ours. The future is secure. Let us go with confidence into whatever each day brings, knowing we are children of the King. And we ask this in Christ's name. Amen.